Welcome to Motley Fool Conversations. I am Motley Fool contributor Rich LaMelo. My co-host today is Motley Fool Chief Investment Officer Andy Cross. Today we're joined by one of the foremost minds in business strategy, Martin Reeves. As chairman of the BCG Henderson Institute, Martin leads a global research of the future of business and has become a sought-after voice on how companies can adapt, thrive, and reinvent themselves in an age of constant disruption. He's the author of several influential books, a frequent contributor to the Harvard Business Review, and a regular presence on the TED stage. From exploring the biology of resilient organizations to decoding imagination as a business skill, Martin brings a unique lens to strategy, innovation, and leadership. Martin, welcome to the Motley Fool.
Thanks very much, Rich, and Andy, good to be here.
Okay, well, we've got a lot to cover, as I kind of laid out in the open. So let's just jump in with very recently, you and Bob Goodson released a book called Like, the Button That Changed the World, which looks at how digital systems have kind of reshaped human behavior, identity, society, all catalyzed by, quite simply, the like button. What sparked the idea for the book? And I have to say, I love this comment from you. It was brilliant in its simplicity. Let's talk a little bit about it.
Now you've answered the question. I mean, it is an unusual thing to write a book about it, I think, because it's an apparently trivial object that we maybe don't pay much attention to. But I mean, I was fascinated by the elegance and the simplicity of the like button in terms of, how could a dozen lines of JavaScript code, which is the like button, change so much about how we transact, how we communicate, how we relate, and then of course all of the negative social side effects and the revolution in advertising and social media. It's just incredible that such a small thing could trigger so many changes. But the more proximal reason is I was actually getting to know Bob Goodson, my co-author, who originally was a medieval literature scholar who somehow ended up as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur and CEO. We were just getting to know each other, and I discovered in our coffee conversation that he was a bit of an avid collector. You could even say hoarder. He's collected every train receipt since he was 10 years old, and so and he was moving. So to make conversation, I said to him, "You must be finding interesting things in your boxes, Bob." And he said yes, and he pulled out a sketchbook, and there was a dated sketch of the like button that I immediately recognized was about 5 years before I'd known Facebook to have rolled out the like button. So I said to Bob, "Are you telling me you invented the like button, Bob?" And he gave me a very strange response. He didn't say yes or no. He said, "No, of course not. Maybe, I'm not sure." And I thought, how could you not be sure whether you invented the like button or not? So this 30-minute conversation we had extended to a whole day until we were thrown out at the last closing restaurant in Mill Valley. And essentially by the end of it, we had a plan to write a book about the fascinating and winding story of the invention of the like button.
That's amazing. That's a great background. And I love how you kind of explore how it basically flattened human nuance, right, into kind of binary approval, like or not like. What would you say your takeaway as you wrote the book are kind of some of the broader consequences of this binary outcome?
Well, the actual story, like why the thumbs up and who invented the like button is fascinating enough, and then what does it tell us about the nature of invention is like a second layer. But so the surface story is essentially that it's very, very hard to say, even after 3 years of research, who invented the like button, because a whole community of pioneers and early Web 2.0 companies were looking at similar challenges at roughly the same time, and they all had different versions of things that contributed to the like button. The essential problem was that in the nuclear winter following the dot-com bust, this idea of Web 2.0 emerged, and but there were a couple of problems with Web 2.0. The idea of the web where users generate the content. One of them principally being that the users were not generating any content. So that was one problem to solve. The second problem to solve was that this was pre-broadband. This is 2000, around the years 2000. This was pre-broadband. So anything you did to communicate with anyone, like displaying a like button or whatever, would likely trigger a page refresh. And the last thing you wanted to do in a conversation was trigger a page refresh, because you would lose 20 seconds. You'd probably lose whatever person was doing what they were doing on your website. So that was a technical problem, and many businesses were facing different versions of this. Bob Goodson was one of the people that came up with this dated sketch of the like button. The problem he was trying to solve as the employee number one of Yelp was that the people were not submitting restaurant reviews for Yelp's business model. And they didn't have a lot of money. It was a startup. So, what other currency is there? There's the currency of recognition. What happens if we allow people to compliment the reviews of others? But you couldn't trigger a page refresh. So the answer was, do the computation locally in the browser in JavaScript. But that was not why JavaScript was designed. This was like an unintended feature of JavaScript. And then other people were doing things at the same time. Like, not sure whether you remember a site called Hot or Not, a rather salacious site where you voted on the appearance of your colleagues and your friends. And so it was a voting, right? So voting is the same problem, right? Which is, how do I display my vote? And how do I vote on things? And how do I get a counter on my vote? And page refresh, the same problem. So a community of people innovated. Why the like button? Why the thumbs up gesture? That's also pretty interesting. So you ask, I presume you're both American. Ask anyone American, like, what is the very origin of the like button? They're likely to say the Colosseum of ancient Rome, where people voted on the fate of the fallen gladiators. The reason that they think that is the case is that there was a famous painting in 1870 that was very popular with the rising American middle class that displayed the Vestal Virgins in the Colosseum giving the thumbs down gesture. But we know for a fact that this was not what the Romans did. The Romans probably did more something like the sheathed thumb and the downward pointing thumb. But for dramatic effect, this French painter actually had these gestures, and then it became a linguistic fact. And in fact, it was reinforced in the very year that Bob drew his sketch by the Gladiator movie, Gladiator 1, which Ridley Scott originally intended to turn down because he didn't want to do what he called a sandals and toga movie. But he was shown the very same painting that created this myth that the Romans did this and this. And he was persuaded by the drama of the painting to actually make the movie. So the cultural history of the like button is also interesting. So that, if you like, is some of the story of, how did the like button come about? But I think it tells us a lot also about how does innovation really work? How does technological innovation really work?
Yeah. Well, and Martin, not just innovation, but creativity. Just the simple, design of a thumbs up or thumbs down has had really second order effects in lots of different ways. When you look at this, the history of it, the arc of history of the like button, does that surprise, the extent of that, does it surprise you, these second order effects of such a simple design?
Yeah, and I've delved into why was that the case. I mean, what are the effects of this little invention, the like button? It spread like wildfire. Nobody spent a penny on promoting it. We never needed an instruction manual. It just took off.
Yeah.
It became a universal, you could call it linguistic standard for the Web 2.0. It spread well beyond social media. Now every shopping site, every B2B site, FedEx and customer analytics, your Netflix movies, like everybody.
The Motley Fool. We have a like button on our
We have a like button. Now, if you look really hard, you can find some people have a heart or some people have a thumbs down button. But basically, the de facto standard globally is the thumbs up. And so what does it tell us about these things? It tells us a number of things, I think. One of them is that, so I'm not sure how you were educated, but at my school, when we studied science, I heard heroic stories of individual creative geniuses like Sir Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone and Sir Humphrey Davy and the minor safety lamp, with great foresight in a moment, a flash of inspiration, inventing something. Well, one moment we didn't have the thing they invented, and then the next moment we had the blueprint for the invention that would solve some major social problem. It tells us that actually innovation is not generally like that, because this was absolutely a community of innovators, and there's good science that shows that this is the norm rather than the exception. And also, I interviewed all of these people, and or my co-author Bob did, and one characteristic of all of these pioneering interviews is that not a single one of these pioneers of the like button actually had any great foresight over the eventual impact of the like button. In fact, something really strange happened when we tried to talk to these pioneers about the like button. They'd say, no, what day are you talking about? Because it wasn't, there was not such a thing in the afternoon, in their minds as the afternoon when I invented the like button. How they thought about this was, that particular day I was just trying to solve a tactical challenge, just like every other day. And it just so happened that this tactical challenge I solved may have contributed to something bigger. Absolutely no one was saying, this will create the monetization model for the social media industry. This will create enormous social side effects. This will change how we interact. We only came across one person, and we looked very hard, that had the foresight of the end state, and it was not a technologist. Can you guess who it was? It was a science fiction author, Gary Steingart. So Gary Steingart, at the very beginning of the social media revolution, was writing a novel called The True Sad Love Story. That's a great novel, a great science fiction novel. And he foresaw how all of this would play out. And we asked him how he could possibly do that. And it turns out that he was asking a different question. So the technologists were basically asking, how do I solve my tactical problem? Or what can the technology do? He asked a different question. He said, well, assuming this thing, the like button, does what it's purported to do, what will humans do with it? And of course, the answer, using his knowledge of humanity, was they'll lie with it, they'll steal with it, they'll beg, steal, borrow, imitate, flatter. They will do all of the human things. And if you factor that into the equation, you can see dimly then what might become of this. You might have this world where people are evaluating other over the social web, where kids are spending too much time on screens, where there's this strange virtualization of reality. People prefer, to comment on a video of a steak and a glass of wine rather than actually consume a physical one. And he foresaw all of that, but he was the only person, not any of the technologists. The other sort of big thing about the like button is that there was an interesting philosophy going on, which was a bit unconventional. So a book was published in 2000 that was very influential in Silicon Valley called Don't Make Me Think. And the idea was that if you have something innovative, do not make it look new. Do not talk about the whiz-bang features. Reduce friction. Make it seem ordinary. And what's more ordinary than the thumbs up gesture? I don't need to know about the JavaScript code or the advanced functionality. It's like, great, I can already do it. And this became quite an influential philosophy, and I think it applies to the Apple Watch if you think about it. The Apple Watch is not a watch, but by making it seem like a watch, it's like, oh, it's no big deal. I'll buy one of those. If I said, would you like to buy an advanced supercomputer on your wrist with extremely interesting programming, you'd probably say, well, I don't think I understand that.
Well, it's the same with our phones, I think, too. I was like, when are we going to stop calling our phones actual phones?
Yes.
Considering the amount of time we talk on them compared to the amount of times we hold them are, 1%?
Well, it's a really important issue for innovators, I think. I talk about this in one of my other books, The Imagination Machine. I think there is a critical moment when, I call it the moment when a thing becomes a thing. Like the thing that didn't have a name gets a name, the fax machine, the Apple Watch. And I think you have three ways you can go in how you name things. And I think it's very strategic to how successful the invention is going to be. One of them is you can emphasize familiarity. You can say it's not new. It's just a watch, Or you can go functional. You can say, yeah, you will never guess what this thing is, this fax machine thing. So I'm going to actually describe in the name. I call it a facsimile machine. It creates facsimiles of pieces of paper. So okay, now I know what it does. Or you can go overboard in emphasizing novelty. So think about the French Connection T-shirt, the FC UK T-shirt. You do the double take because you think you read an obscene word, and there's absolutely nothing new about a T-shirt, but it grabs the attention to call it, FC UK. And so, under what circumstances would you use one of these philosophies rather than another? That's a really important decision. So in the case of the like button, the important thing was that it was familiar. It was quickly adoptable. It became a human linguistic currency. Compliments were given, compliments were received, and this enabled the social net. So that sort of that probably didn't even feel like a decision at the time, like not an explicit decision to the innovators, but that's sort of what was going on.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about how, like, there was no eureka moment where they kind of said, oh, that was the day I worked on the like button. It's kind of like one of the, a rock band when they're, kind of arguing, should this song be on the album or not? And then it turns out, yeah, they kind of throw it on at somebody's insistence and it becomes like, a smash #1 hit. And they were like, really? That was the #1 hit? It sounds a little bit like that when you describe, kind of the genesis of it. And I have to ask the question, is it possible to try to foresee that next like button that has just such a huge impact, or is that just too,
I think innovation. So I've actually done some serious mathematical work with the London Institute of Mathematical Sciences on what I call the mathematical signature of serendipity. Like, what is it? Is it randomness? Is it a pattern that is predictable? Is it a pattern that we can understand but not predict? And it seems to be a pattern that we can't predict. It's not randomness. So if you look at the, how fields evolve in terms of innovations, and you can apply this to anything. You can apply this to jazz bands. What are the composition of successful rock and jazz bands? You can apply it to films. You can apply it to recipes. You can apply it to software stacks. And we've done all of that. And it looks like innovation is mostly the recombination of existing elements. And some of those combinations turn out to have incredible utility, and some of them don't. And it's very hard to predict. So we can't predict it, I'd say, in general.
Sure.
But we can adopt the right mental model. So if you say, okay, I buy it, basically innovation is serendipitous. What can you do to promote serendipity? Serendipity is, the technical definition is unanticipated favorable outcomes, unpredictable favorable outcomes. Well, you can increase the number of collisions, right? Which is the more recombinations you've done, the more shots on goal, the more likely one of them is, have a probability of going into the goal. The trouble is that's normally expensive. So the second thing you can do is you can reduce the costs of playing around with ideas. So Lego, the toy company, has a philosophy of learning through play. It applies surely to its toys and its child customers or users, but it also applies actually to the management model. The idea is continuously experiment and informal experiment and discover new combinations. A third thing you can do is to go external. I mean, who invented? Is it more likely that you will invent something inside a company or outside a company? The famous Andy Grove quote, I think it was Andy Grove, wasn't it, that said that, like, most of the smart people are out there, not in here. I mean, the like story basically is a story of parallel, a loosely connected community of innovation. So if you were entirely introverted as a company, you wouldn't be accessing that, you might call it collective intelligence. But you can do things like acqui-hires, right? You can look at who's doing what and you can hire them. There's a lot of that going on right now with AI and the big AI players. They're trying to steal the people with the ideas and the abilities. You can be very mentally flexible. So often, the famous psychology experiment where somebody in a gorilla suit runs across a basketball court, and because people are not expecting it, they actually don't see it. We see what we expect to see. So some companies actually train their executives in close observation, the idea of thinking more like a novelist than an accountant, to actually observe the details. Because by definition, these unusual recombinations that turn out to be hit products, they sort of are an anomaly, right? They're the needle in the haystack. And so your mind has to be primed to, we may not have the best thing forever. There may be a needle in a haystack. So you looking for pattern breaking, and this is supported by psychological research that basically says that the human imagination is triggered by pattern breaking, by surprise. We're extremely good at exception detection. And so we need to surprise ourselves. And the sure way of avoiding surprising yourself is not to look out the window, to be entirely introverted, which is, by the way, what many large corporations are. They're basically looking internally.
Yeah, Martin, it's one thing at the Fool, we've been, as we think about it, broadening out to folks like Rich and other AI specialists that we're partnering with externally, because we've realized that, most of the talent, as Andy said, is out there. It does, and you mentioned imagination, it does want me to ask about the concept around strategic imagination, why some companies have more imagination, the importance of imagination. Can you talk a little bit about your learning and your studying of
Right.
the importance of the concept of imagination? Because we also believe that great growth investors, it takes imagination to be a great growth investor. I think that's a skill set that can be learned, but also not really appreciated by the investing class
Yeah.
as much. I think the same in business.
So this was my book, The Imagination Machine, and I called it The Imagination Machine to deliberately provoke. There's a sort of a paradox, right, which is, how could you possibly have a machine for imagining? Isn't that a very quirky human thing? And the reason I did that was that, so we did some research that on, do CEOs want their organizations to be more imaginative? Absolutely, because the person at the top usually knows that the only reason why the company got famous or became an established company or a successful company is that they brought something new to the world. And
Right.
bringing something new to the world, a thing that didn't previously have a name, that's imagination. So an active imagination is responsible for the success of most companies. But most CEOs are very disappointed with the imaginative of their companies. So you've got this paradox that any 5-year-old has this very human capacity to imagine things that are not the case, but could be the case, imagination. But groups of adults with processes and rules, i.e. a company, find it extraordinarily difficult to be systematically and collectively imaginative. And there are all sorts of reasons for that. I mean, one of them is introversion. A company is like a sphere. The larger the radius of the sphere, the lower the surface area, the ratio of the surface area to the volume. More and more of the positions start to be entirely internal. The equipment and the processes of the company is the main focus of attention. So that's one barrier. Another one is the specialization. If the finance department is looking at the finance bit of the business and the factory is looking at the production part of the business, almost nobody in the company is looking at the whole. You hope the executive is looking at the whole, but they may be too far from the marketplace to be seeing the surprises that trigger the reimagination of the whole. Complacency, I have been successful is often converted into, therefore I will continue to be successful. There's no reason why, I'm sure this is always like on the investor, the things I get from my bank about, past performance being no guide to future performance. No, we have to reinvent ourselves every day. So I thought, okay, this is important, it's broken, so there must be a playbook for imagination somewhere, collective imagination. Actually, we couldn't find a playbook, which I found rather surprising, that nobody's created a playbook for imagination. And it turns out the reason is that we have this idea that we have this very heroic model of innovation, which is the Steve Jobs or the rare genius that I am not, in a moment of inspiration, create some new possibility with great foresight that I could never come up with. And this is such a mysterious human quirky affair that we could never possibly dream of a process. But this doesn't make sense if you think about it, because we don't say, oh my God, human resources, that's so quirky and human and unpredictable. You could never possibly organize an HR department, or consumer psychology, or investor psychology. Humans are so complicated. We shouldn't even think about having a theory of, investor sentiment. We wouldn't say that, but for some reason we do that with invention and discovery. So what I set out to do is to say, well, yeah, we may not be able to exactly predict these things, but we can absolutely bias. We can, like strategy, in fact, we can bias the probabilities in favor of competitive outcomes. So we've already mentioned one of them, which is one thing that companies can do is to be externally oriented. They can defy the gravity of introversion and just look at, oh, that customer's doing something that we didn't intend with the product, or this big company is not using our product at all and never has. That's strange. Like, why is that? You can investigate the anomalies rather than just reporting the averages. And so the book essentially goes through, 10 or 20 things you can do to have a bias towards imaginative success as a company. Another one is complacency. You can actually, as Jeff Bezos has done with his idea of, day one culture is, stay humble. You're great, but that doesn't mean you're going to be great tomorrow. In fact, you need to believe that you will one day fail and may not be great in order to have the motivation to be hungry for new ideas. You can train people in inductive thinking and observation. I mean, business thinking is dominated by rational analytic thinking, and there's a role for that. But there's also a role for like noticing what's strange, what's interesting, trying to understand what new possibility might be suggested to that, which is collective imagination. So there's a whole bunch of things a company can do, but it starts with the accepting that innovation is more serendipitous than we like to believe, because we want to believe in the strength of our own agency.
Yeah. And if you get a company, whether it's, a leader or the culture, to buy into that, that kind of imagination, you've in some of your writings, you've described imagination as a muscle. How can you train that muscle within that organization?
I think so. A sort of there are many ways, but some of the big ways would be to enact a different philosophy, to demonstrate a different philosophy from leadership, and in other words, establish a culture of curiosity. And how would you do that? You could celebrate asking questions. I mean, there's some companies that, interestingly, Satya Nadella recently talked about turning Microsoft from a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company. And that's a different way of saying he's trying to create a culture of questions, not answers, because the new things will be unanswered questions. If you think about it, a strategy is a sort of fiction, right? Because you're trying to bring about an outcome that is not the case. It's a figment of someone's imagination. It's a hope, but you build a logic as to why that hope is possible. You inform people, what the path is to reach that hope. You focus attention on it, and so that questions. You can hire for curiosity. Would you hire somebody that had all the answers and no questions? Probably not. Probably not in this climate. There is breaking up comfort and stability. So I was speaking the other day to the CEO of the former CEO of Genpact, with the major BPO, business process outsourcing organization, and he strongly believes in a culture of curiosity. And one of his measures is, if you have a team that's really high performing and stable and is populated by superstars, break it up, because if there's not motion, there'll eventually be complacency. Mm-hmm. Like high performance and self-satisfaction is the beginning of complacency, is the beginning of the downfall of a great company. You can train people in the right skills. I think the skills involved in noticing anomalies, thinking counterfactually, in other words, thinking about things that could be the case that are not the case. Looking at not only the averages, companies often look at averages or cumulative totals of results in a particular period. Look at some outlying specific data points too, because the individual stories may tell you something. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do if you accept the idea that it's serendipitous. But at root, it's sort of avoiding the false celebration of our agency, the idea that we can predict everything. We were great yesterday, so we'll be great tomorrow, and we're the best in the business, so we know. Right. No, you don't. There's probably something going on out there that's a bet against your business model. Go look at what it is and be very paranoid and spend time understanding what it is, because that's the curiosity that will lead to the next pillar. Yeah.
Martin, Imagination Machine was written a year or two before ChatGPT came out. Yeah. And so it very apropos, because maybe ChatGPT is like an imagination machine. But I want to ask you about the impact of artificial intelligence, chatbots, the explosion we've seen over the last 2 years of AI through corporations, and how that is harnessing or harming imagination that can be put forth at scale at companies.
Right. Well, I was very lucky to write the Imagination Machine before the AI boom and after it, because I could look at the before and after and what had changed. Yeah. And so one of the chapters in the Imagination Machine is actually the chapter's called AI, Artificial Imagination ? And so the question is, we've got all these recommendations on how to harness collective imagination. Is it just a matter of time before a machine can do this? And at the time, the consensus among the experts, people like Kai-Fu Lee, was that AI would be an enormous threat to, or enormous opportunity to mechanize or to automate routine processes. But the thing which AI could never do is the uniquely human things. I think his list was imagination, empathy, and ethics. Like AI won't be able to do that. So can AI do these things? Actually, we don't need to speculate, because in the imagination machine, we already showed that for every step in our 6-step process of enhancing collective imagination, there were already tools that can potentiate human imagination. So, for example, let's take surprise, this first step in the 6-step process. Finding a surprise that triggers your curiosity and your rethinking of your business model. Well, that's a sort of like a needle in a haystack problem, right? It's essentially boils down to noticing anomalies. And so the human has to direct attention to the anomalies. They have to have the hunger for new knowledge. But in terms of actually finding the needle, AI is very good at that. Control massive amounts of information and find, the exception to this rule or whatever. So finding needle in haystacks, the technology can certainly help with that. In terms of recombining existing elements of knowledge and creating new counterfactual possibilities, AI has no physics. It has no sense of is an idea plausible or feasible or not, because whether something works in reality, it's to do with a set of learnings that are not often written about. So there's no training data set of like, how do I judge whether something is practical or not? And so AI may not come up with the suggestion, but can certainly come up with a bunch of candidate suggestions for the new idea. And in fact, we did a clinical trial on this with a couple of thousand consultants in collaboration with Harvard and Wharton, and we tested humans and humans plus AI and AI alone on a bunch of classical business problems. So one of them was an innovation problem, invent a new type of shoe, I think was the problem. And then we had the suggestions impartially judged by a human expert panel. And actually the human plus the AI on the innovation problems did better than the unassisted humans. So I think absolutely AI can help. Now, can it replace all aspects of human imagination? I don't think so, because for a couple of reasons. I mean, one, this sort of world physics, like, is it actually possible? Is it feasible? I think that's not something that you typically publish a website on. There's not a lot of training data for that, so that's not there. I think ethics, you could do that, but should we do that? I mean, that's not there, right? The purpose. I mean, who's going to buy the footwear at the end of the day, the new shoe? A human. So we have to tap into our human utility function. The AI cannot tell us what we want. It might make suggestions, but the purpose of the exercise and the scoping of the exercise, the governance. I mean, people and AI are very good at what the philosopher of Frankfurt calls bullshit. I mean, you get things that sound very plausible that are actually nonsensical on close examination. That's governance, right? I mean, of the many suggestions, which are the ones that actually make sense and they're not hallucinations? I mean, you need some sort of governance, and that must involve some sort of judgment. So, I mean, I think that will remain somewhat human, although we could have AI supervising AI. And then you've got like the social purpose of the corporation. I mean, if we could all put ourselves out of a job, would that be a smart idea for our football team, which is humanity?
Yeah.
Probably not, So at some point you need the social permission to do useful things. The corporation doesn't have an automatic right to exist. It has a social license. So I'd say definitely AI has a role to play in imagination. It already does. We don't need to speculate about it, but we need humans in there for all of the reasons I mentioned, and for one other reason, which is the pilot that doesn't fly the airplane becomes unable to land the airplane. We need to refresh our skills through practice. And so there's some hard work to be done in terms of observing anomalies and thinking of possibilities. Even if we can technically delegate that, we probably shouldn't, because as an absolute minimum would be less effective governors of AI. We would lose our own skills in the process.
Rich, can I ask a quick follow-up for Martin?
Of course. Yeah, of
Martin, the question on the corporation, as you were talking, I got thinking, in a world that now is becoming so driven by creators, do you see the role of the corporation shifting? And, on a scale of 1 to 10, the success of the corporation globally over the next 20 years, is it going to be more or less impactful than it is now?
Well, I think that, so I've been doing strategy for an embarrassingly long period of time. So I've seen that the world has already changed under the influence of technology. We're asking different questions. And, essentially the strategy question for business is the universal thing is that we have to think about not just operational effectiveness, we have to think about competitive advantage. So if I use AI, if I buy the Microsoft subscription that everybody else has bought or other tools trained on the same data, this is a force not of differentiation, this is a force of commoditization. I may be more efficient, but I may be less competitive. So competitive advantage, that hasn't changed. But how we achieve competitive advantage, everything has changed, right? We have this this faster velocity of circulation of information. So an organization is an information processing machine. It needs to move faster. We have greater uncertainty because in an interconnected world, everything can influence everything. A political scandal in China can have implications very quickly the other side of the world. So we need to be our strategies need to be resilient. I think is a really important word in strategy right now, which is they need to be resilient to circumstances being other than we predict them to be. Everything is political, and every aspect of business is political. Politics is not just something you can ignore. I mean, I think traditionally we assume that, by and large, the interests of governments and business are aligned because that's the prosperity of the nation, the prosperity of society. We can't assume that anymore. Everything is fractious. Who you hire, who you sell to, how you market your products, everything is. So actually, this becomes part of strategy. We need to be able to negotiate. We need to be able to negotiate political risk. And in that context, to come to your question, the corporation has changed many times. The corporation is not a constant. If you go back in history, corporations started as charter corporations, which is somebody would get a royal charter permission to build a bridge or undertake some specific mission. And then you had the limited liability corporation, which is the idea that the corporation is a sort of a corporate person. It has a certain limited liability and has its own legal framework. And then we had the sort of social revolution. The tide is turning a little bit, but there was a time when the UN Global Compact took off and everybody was interested in not just the efficiency and the economic impact of a corporation, but its social credentials and its values, and all of that became important. And I think that the corporation will certainly change again. How will it change? It'll probably be more algorithmic. So what is a corporation? Right now, a corporation is mainly a group of human minds arranged into roles in a hierarchy that undertakes a particular task. I think already a corporation is now like a cognitive hybrid, some sort of hybrid of machine and human cognition that gets a task done. Yeah. I think the boundaries of a corporation are more fluid now. We have business ecosystems. 10 years ago, most of the largest companies in the world were either banks or oil companies. Now, about 6 out of 10 at my last count are digital ecosystems. What's a digital ecosystem? It's a community of companies that collaborate to achieve a purpose. That means that the boundaries of the corporation are flexible and the corporations are more minimal. I think social permission will become really important. I mean, there's been a sort of political backlash against sustainability and DE&I and so on, but the bigger picture is that everything is now politicized, and everybody needs to think through the social and reputational consequences of everything that they do, and that's now part of strategy. So I think the corporation is in the process of changing again. If I had to give you one big idea that I think will be central, which hasn't been historically central, it would be collective intelligence as the main asset of the organization. So as you know, as as an investment-oriented company, it used to be that companies were close in value to their book value. Like their value was roughly the value of the assets plus a small premium. But now for most companies, the value of the company is largely intangible. The value of successful corporations is many times their book value. So what is that value? People have speculated it's the value of brand, or I think it's the value of the collective connections and intelligence of the company. There's something about the company as a social machine to get things done that some companies are very good at and others are very bad at, and that's what we're placing that intangible value on. But we don't really organize like business strategy as a discipline or leadership as a discipline around explicitly maximizing that or managing that. I think management will evolve so that will become a much more explicit factor in managing corporations. So yes, the corporation of tomorrow will be very different. I mean, if I think about what will my daughters understand by the word organization in the future, they'll probably think of some sort of combination of AI and humans that gets things done in an economically and socially effective manner. That's a rather different definition of the corporation to the classical one.
Yeah, and obviously you write quite a bit about strategy and adaptability, and kind of in this environment, and oh, by the way, you work for BCG, so you're of the consulting world. How do you help leaders become more kind of ambidextrous, able to both execute but also explore kind of that strategy at that creativity at the same time?
Well, I think business has always had two jobs, right? I mean, because nothing ever lasted forever. I mean, in a slower moving world, how long the greatness of a company lasted was much longer than today, but it was never forever. So businesses, I think, always had two jobs. One of them is to run the current business, which is all about efficiency and squeezing every last cent of shareholder value out of the current assets and executing against their plans and so on. But the other job was always and prepare for the demise of that recipe and find the new recipe, the new growth pillar or whatever. I think there was a world where we could make two simplifying assumptions. One of them is that finding new pillars happens on the time cycle of a managerial career. So I don't need to think about both. The next guy needs to think about the new way, but I don't need to think about that. And then the other one is that the job of a big company is to systematize and grow the recipe created by a smaller company. So basically the innovation and the exploration is all for smaller companies. I think both of these things had some element of truth. But the whole thing has been compressed. So I'd say now every company needs to be able to reinvent itself, and it can even become a continuous process. And that the blossoming and the renewal and the reimagination need to happen within individual human careers. And so I think that there are companies where the management is mainly focused on execution and efficiency. I think there's a substantial minority that are interested in the whole equation, and they demand what some people call thought leadership. In other words, they want you as a consultant to fix specific problems or address specific opportunities, but they also want to know, should I be thinking about this a different way? Is there a new way of thinking about this? Is there a company out there that's doing this thing of, for example, deploying artificial intelligence for imagination in a new way? And so that's actually my business. So I run a research institute called the Henderson Institute, and what I do is I think about what are the next issues that are going to be important to business. I research them, sometimes in collaboration with academics, sometimes in collaboration with pioneer companies. I publish on those topics, and then I counsel the curious CEOs, the vanguard of CEOs who want to know about the new ideas, on the new things that they might want to think about, or I react to their ideas about the new ideas that they are thinking about. And I think that's always been a really important part of business. I think there was a time probably from Reaganomics, between Reaganomics and the internet revolution, where we had the impression that it was mainly about running a stable concern. The main concern was efficiency and shareholder value. But I think we're back in a way, it's back to the future of thinking about not only leveraging existing value generation machinery, but creating new value generation machinery and propositions and pillars. And is that complicated? Yeah, that's a bit more complicated than a simple efficiency bias recipe, but that's the way things are, I think.
Martin, I was going to ask. I was just going to say, just before we get ready to close up, and thank you for your time here. Does it have to be messy? Is it always just definitionally innovation, imagination? Is that collaborative process messy and part of the DNA of that experience?
Yeah, well, that's a great question actually, because to me this gets at the value or the loss associated with complexity. So the largest organizations now rival nation states in their size. We're into the era of the trillion-dollar company.
Yeah.
We've got multiple trillion-dollar companies now, multiple businesses, thousands of people, lots of procedures, very, very complicated. I'd give you a slightly contradictory response. Is all of that complexity strictly necessary? No, I think that complexity accumulates. I think it needs to be pruned and cultivated. And to reinforce that, I think the ideas that I'm talking about here are the sort of intuitions and common sense that the best leaders have always had. I mean, like the really big people in management thinking always had these sorts of intuitions. I think, but I don't want to go as far as to say complexity is a really bad thing. Everything can be simple, because in the domain of competition, competitive advantage, the main sort of thing I think about, what you want ideally is things that are effective, but hard for competitors to imitate. And so a certain type of complexity is actually your friend. So it's having the right type of complexity. So if you have, unbridled accumulating complexity and it's out of control, and a lot of the complexity is arbitrary, it's the processes for yesterday's business model or something, and too much, prune. But can complexity be useful? Yes. I mean, if you have a great idea, think about what will make it hard for competitors to imitate. This is a very, very live issue, actually, because what I see with AI is a lot of companies assuming that they need to deploy AI because others are deploying them, and if they use AI, they'll be advantaged in some way. But that is a very contentious proposition, because they may be more efficient, but it's a form of efficiency that's open to everyone. And so actually AI could be, without careful thinking, a force of commoditization. It may make your differentiation less. So it raises the question, how can I use AI, get the efficiency gains, but also be advantaged? In other words, hard for it to imitate. And I'm just in the process of working on a piece actually that says that it's a certain type of complexity. And so what is hard to imitate? What is not hard to imitate is buying an AI subscription. What is a bit hard to imitate is systems of advantage. So if you say, why is my company advantaged? And you say, well, we have advantaged customer information, advantaged logistics, proprietary IT, and it's 5 things, that's pretty hard to imitate. The second thing that's hard to imitate is path dependence. If your ability to invest in something depends on you having done 5 things beforehand, only the things that the largest and the wisest corporations will have done, that's hard to imitate because you didn't have the right history. You can't spring to an advanced AI application if you don't have the basic one, for example. The third one is culture. So if we take this idea of what I call the bionic corporation, which is a hybrid of humans and machine cognition that is the future of the corporation, that's pretty complicated, right? How do the humans interact with the AI? How do the humans interact with each other? How do we all get synced on what is important around here? How do we get things done? How do we scale innovation? How do we make this ambidexterity balancing the old with the new? Well, that's partly coded in culture. What I mean concretely, to refer back to something I've already said, take Tiger Tagarajan, the former CEO of Genpact's idea of building a culture of curiosity. If you are not an organization that celebrates asking questions and exploring new knowledge, you can't just say, okay, let's have one of those then. Yeah. You just can't. It's very hard. Yeah. It takes a lot of time. This is, I think that's how you think about ambidexterity, which has always been there as a job for corporations. It's just now more urgent, and how you think about using AI in ways that don't make you more the same instead of different and advantaged.
Martin, as we get ready to wrap up, and wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask, are there any companies out there that you admire that you see getting this right? As you think about the future of a competitive advantage and you think about innovation and imagination?
Well, I'm very wary of the case study because the thing is I don't like to be limited by what is the case, right? I mean, part of the imagination is not being limited by what happens to be the case.
Fair.
So I'm never going to say there's a perfect company out there, we're done. I think all of that we've discussed today, there are untapped possibilities. Also, I find that when I do have to put case studies in my writings and my books because a certain type of mind demands them, right? They say, give me an example of what you mean. So for the purposes of communication, I give examples, but it's usually examples of companies that are good at one aspect for a while until their competitor does even better. But I celebrate a bunch of companies for aspects of what we've discussed today in the books that we mentioned. So I celebrate the Japanese company Recruit, for example. It's a services conglomerate, and it has an HR system that's entirely designed to glorify the building of new pillars as much as the people with the biggest organizations representing yesterday's business model. So I think that's rather unique. I celebrate Lego as being a company that shows that play is a serious business. I mean, play, I'm a former biologist. What is play biologically? It's de-risked, spontaneous, pleasurable learning. It's like everybody's playing all the time because it's fun. Imagine you had a culture like that in a company. Well, Lego does, so I celebrate them. In terms of resilience, I cite American Express as an example that had the great financial crisis and COVID, and they did a bunch of stuff like everybody did a bunch of stuff to cope, but they went a step further. They institutionalized and codified their crisis playbook. So I think that extra step is like a wonderful thing. I celebrate the companies that are actually not sitting around saying, can AI help with imagination? They're actually using the tools that we already have to potentiate human imagination. So there are partial examples for each of the aspects of what I've done, and there's no perfect company, and if we believe that there was one, that probably could be quite a destructive belief because it may encourage the complacency that we really don't need in relation to innovation.
Yeah. Well, Martin, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to come on Motley Fool Conversations. This has been terrific. The books are called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy, The Imagination Machine, and most recently, Like, The Button That Changed the World. Martin Reeves, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot. It's a fun conversation. Thank you, Rich and Andy.
Thank you, Martin.
Take care.